Section 5 of the Commission in Lunacy by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Clara Bell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bruce Peary. This innermost room had a shabby carpet. The windows were hung with grey holland curtains. The furniture consisted of a few mahogany chairs, 2 armchairs, a desk with a revolving front, an ordinary office table, and on the chimney shelf a dingy clock and 2 old candlesticks. The old man led the way for Popinot and his registrar, and pulled forward 2 chairs as though he were master of the place. Monsieur d'Espard left it to him. After the preliminary civilities, during which the judge watched the supposed lunatic, the Marquis naturally asked what was the object of this visit. On this, Popinot glanced significantly at the old gentleman and the Marquis. "I believe, Monsieur le Marquis," said he, "that the character of my functions and the inquiry that has brought me here make it desirable that we should be alone, though it is understood by law that in such cases the inquiries have a sort of family publicity. I am judge on the inferior Court of Appeal for the Department of the Seine, and charged by the President with the duty of examining you as to certain facts set forth in a petition for a commission in lunacy on the part of the Marquise d'Espard." The old man withdrew. When the lawyer and the Marquis were alone, the clerk shut the door and seated himself unceremoniously at the office table, where he laid out his papers and prepared to take down his notes. Popinot had still kept his eye on Monsieur d'Espard. He was watching the effect on him of this crude statement, so painful for a man in full possession of his reason. The Marquis d'Espard, whose face was usually pale, as are those of fair men, suddenly turned scarlet with anger. He trembled for an instant, sat down, laid his paper on the chimney-piece, and looked down. In a moment he had recovered his gentlemanly dignity, and looked steadily at the judge, as if to read in his countenance the indications of his character. "How is it, monsieur," he asked, "that I have had no notice of such a petition?" "Monsieur le Marquis, persons on whom such a commission is held, not being supposed to have the use of their reason, any notice of the petition is unnecessary. The duty of the court chiefly consists in verifying the allegations of the petitioner." "Nothing can be fairer," replied the Marquis. "Well then, monsieur, be so good as to tell me what I ought to do." "You have only to answer my questions, omitting nothing. However delicate the reasons may be which may have led you to act in such a manner as to give Madame d'Espard a pretext for her petition, speak without fear. It is unnecessary to assure you that lawyers know their duties, and that in such cases the profoundest secrecy—" "Monsieur," said the Marquis, whose face expressed the sincerest pain, "if my explanations should lead to any blame being attached to Madame d'Espard's conduct, what will be the result?" "The court may add its censure to its reasons for its decision." "Is such censure optional? If I were to stipulate with you, before replying, that nothing should be said that could annoy Madame d'Espard in the event of your report being in my favor, would the court take my request into consideration?" The judge looked at the Marquis, and the 2 men exchanged sentiments of equal magnanimity. "Noel," said Popinot to his registrar, "go into the other room. If you can be of use, I will call you in." "If, as I am inclined to think," he went on, speaking to the Marquis when the clerk had gone out, "I find that there is some misunderstanding in this case, I can promise you, monsieur, that on your application the court will act with due courtesy. There is a leading fact put forward by Madame d'Espard, the most serious of all, of which I must beg for an explanation," said the judge after a pause. "It refers to the dissipation of your fortune to the advantage of a certain Madame Jean Renaud, the widow of a barge master, or rather to that of her son, Colonel Jean Renaud, for whom you are said to have procured an appointment, to have exhausted your influence with the king, and at last to have extended such protection as secures him a good marriage. The petition suggests that such a friendship is more devoted than any feelings, even those which morality must disapprove." A sudden flush crimsoned the Marquis's face and forehead. Tears even started to his eyes, for his eyelashes were wet. Then wholesome pride crushed the emotions, which in a man are accounted a weakness. "To tell you the truth, monsieur," said the Marquis in a broken voice, "you place me in a strange dilemma. The motives of my conduct were to have died with me. To reveal them, I must disclose to you some secret wounds, must place the honor of my family in your keeping, and must speak of myself, a delicate matter, as you will fully understand. I hope, monsieur, that it will all remain a secret between us. You will no doubt be able to find in the formulas of the law one which will allow of judgment being pronounced without any betrayal of my confidences." "So far as that goes, it is perfectly possible, monsieur le Marquis." "Some time after my marriage," said Monsieur d'Espard, "my wife having run into considerable expenses, I was obliged to have recourse to borrowing. You know what was the position of noble families during the Revolution. I had not been able to keep a steward or a man of business. Nowadays gentlemen are for the most part obliged to manage their affairs themselves. Most of my title deeds had been brought to Paris, from Languedoc, Provence, or Le Comtat, by my father, who dreaded, and not without reason, the inquisition which family title deeds, and what was then styled the parchments of the privileged class, brought down on the owners. Our name is Negrepelisse. D'Espard is a title acquired in the time of Henri IV. By a marriage which brought us the estates and titles of the house of d'Espard, on condition of our bearing an escutcheon of pretence on our coat of arms, those of the house of d'Espard, an old family of Béarn, connected in the female line with that of Albret. Quarterly paley of or and sable, and azure 2 griffins' claws armed, gules in saltire, with the famous motto, Des partem leones. At the time of this alliance we lost Negrepelisse, a little town which was as famous during the religious struggles as was my ancestor who then bore the name. Captain de Negrepelisse was ruined by the burning of all his property, for the Protestants did not spare a friend of Montluc's. The crown was unjust to Monsieur de Negrepelisse. He received neither a marshal's baton, nor a post as governor, nor any indemnity. King Charles IX., who was fond of him, died without being able to reward him. Henri IV. Arranged his marriage with Mademoiselle d'Espard, and secured him the estates of that house, but all those of the Negrepelisses had already passed into the hands of his creditors. My great-grandfather, the Marquis d'Espard, was, like me, placed early in life at the head of his family by the death of his father, who, after dissipating his wife's fortune, left his son nothing but the entailed estates of the d'Espards, burdened with a jointure. The young Marquis was all the more straitened for money because he held a post at court. Being in great favour with Louis XIV, the king's goodwill brought him a fortune. But here, monsieur, a blot stained our escutcheon, an unconfessed and horrible stain of blood and disgrace, which I am making it my business to wipe out. I discovered the secret among the deeds relating to the estate of Nègrepelisse and the packets of letters." At this solemn moment the Marquis spoke without hesitation or any of the repetition habitual with him, but it is a matter of common observation that persons who in ordinary life are afflicted with these two defects are freed from them as soon as any passionate emotion underlies their speech. "The revocation of the Edict of Nantes was decreed," he went on. "You are no doubt aware, monsieur, that this was an opportunity for many favourites to make their fortunes. Louis XIV bestowed on the magnates about his court the confiscated lands of those Protestant families who did not take the prescribed steps for the sale of their property. Some persons in high favour went Protestant hunting, as the phrase was. I have ascertained beyond a doubt that the fortune enjoyed to this day by two ducal families is derived from lands seized from hapless merchants. I will not attempt to explain to you, a man of law, all the manoeuvres employed to entrap the refugees who had large fortunes to carry away. It is enough to say that the lands of Nègrepelisse, comprising 22 churches and rights over the town, and those of Gravenges, which had formerly belonged to us, were at that time in the hands of a Protestant family. My grandfather recovered them by gift from Louis XIV. This gift was effected by documents hallmarked by atrocious iniquity. The owner of these two estates, thinking he would be able to return, had gone through the form of a sale, and was going to Switzerland to join his family, whom he had sent in advance. He wished, no doubt, to take advantage of every delay granted by the law, so as to settle the concerns of his business. This man was arrested by order of the governor. The trustee confessed the truth, the poor merchant was hanged, and my ancestor had the two estates. I would gladly have been able to ignore the share he took in the plot, but the governor was his uncle on the mother's side, and I have unfortunately read the letter in which he begged him to apply to Deodatus, the name agreed upon by the court to designate the king. In this letter there is a tone of jocosity with reference to the victim, which filled me with horror. In the end, the sums of money sent by the refugee family to ransom the poor man were kept by the governor, who dispatched the merchant all the same." The Marquis paused, as though the memory of it were still too heavy for him to bear. "This unfortunate family were named Jean Renaud," he went on. "That name is enough to account for my conduct. I could never think without keen pain of the secret disgrace that weighed on my family. That fortune enabled my grandfather to marry a demoiselle de Navarreins-Lansac, heiress to the younger branch of that house, who were at that time much richer than the elder branch of the Navarreins. My father thus became one of the largest landowners in the kingdom. He was able to marry my mother, a Grandlieu of the younger branch. Though ill-gotten, this property has been singularly profitable. For my part, being determined to remedy the mischief, I wrote to Switzerland, and knew no peace till I was on the traces of the Protestant victim's heirs. At last I discovered that the Jean Renauds, reduced to abject want, had left Fribourg and returned to live in France. Finally, I found a Monsieur Jean Renaud, lieutenant in a cavalry regiment under Napoleon, the sole heir of this unhappy family. In my eyes, monsieur, the rights of the Jean Renauds were clear. To establish a prescriptive right, is it not necessary that there should have been some possibility of proceeding against those who are in the enjoyment of it? To whom could these refugees have appealed? Their court of justice was on high, or rather, monsieur, it was here. And the Marquis struck his hand on his heart. I did not choose that my children should be able to think of me as I have thought of my father and of my ancestors. I aim at leaving them an unblemished inheritance and escutcheon. I did not choose that nobility should be a lie in my person. And after all, politically speaking, ought those émigrés who are now appealing against revolutionary confiscations to keep the property derived from antecedent confiscations by positive crimes? I found in Monsieur Jean Renaud and his mother the most perverse honesty. To hear them, you would suppose that they were robbing me. In spite of all I could say, they will accept no more than the value of the lands at the time when the king bestowed them on my family. The price was settled between us at the sum of 1,100,000 francs, which I was to pay at my convenience and without interest. To achieve this, I had to forego my income for a long time. And then, monsieur, began the destruction of some illusions I had allowed myself as to Madame d'Espard's character. When I proposed to her that we should leave Paris and go into the country, where we could live respected on half of her income, and so more rapidly complete a restitution, of which I spoke to her without going into the more serious details, Madame d'Espard treated me as a madman. I then understood my wife's real character. She would have approved of my grandfather's conduct without a scruple, and have laughed at the Huguenots. Terrified by her coldness and her little affection for her children, whom she abandoned to me without regret, I determined to leave her the command of her fortune, after paying our common debts. It was no business of hers, as she told me, to pay for my follies. As I then had not enough to live on and pay for my sons' education, I determined to educate them myself, to make them gentlemen and men of feeling. By investing my money in the funds, I have been enabled to pay off my obligation sooner than I had dared to hope, for I took advantage of the opportunities afforded by the improvement in prices. If I had kept 4,000 francs a year for my boys and myself, I could only have paid off 20,000 crowns a year, and it would have taken almost 18 years to achieve my freedom. As it is, I have lately repaid the whole of the 1,100,000 francs that were due. Thus I enjoy the happiness of having made this restitution without doing my children the smallest wrong. These, monsieur, are the reasons for the payments made to Madame Jean Renaud and her son. So Madame d'Espard knew the motives of your retirement? Said the judge, controlling the emotion he felt at this narrative. Yes, monsieur. Popinot gave an expressive shrug. He rose and opened the door into the next room. Noel, you can go, said he to his clerk. Monsieur, he went on, though what you have told me is enough to enlighten me thoroughly, I should like to hear what you have to say to the other facts put forward in the petition. For instance, you are here carrying on a business such as is not habitually undertaken by a man of rank. We cannot discuss that matter here, said the Marquis, signing to the judge to quit the room. Neuvillon, said he to the old man, I am going down to my rooms. The children will soon be in. Dine with us. Then, Monsieur le Marquis, said Popinot on the stairs, that is not your apartment? No, monsieur, I took those rooms for the office of this undertaking. You see, and he pointed to an advertisement sheet, the history is being brought out by one of the most respectable firms in Paris, and not by me. The Marquis showed the lawyer into the ground-floor rooms, saying, This is my apartment. Popinot was quite touched by the poetry, not aimed at, but pervading this dwelling. The weather was lovely, the windows were open, the air from the garden brought in a wholesome earthy smell, the sunshine brightened and gilded the woodwork of a rather gloomy brown. At the sight, Popinot made up his mind that a madman would hardly be capable of inventing the tender harmony of which he was at that moment conscious. I should like just such an apartment, thought he. You think of leaving this part of town? He inquired. I hope so, replied the Marquis, but I shall remain till my younger son has finished his studies, and till the children's character is thoroughly formed, before introducing them to the world and to their mother's circle. Indeed, after giving them the solid information they possess, I intend to complete it by taking them to travel to the capitals of Europe, that they may see men and things, and become accustomed to speak the languages they have learned. And, monsieur, he went on, giving the judge a chair in the drawing-room, I could not discuss the book on China with you in the presence of an old friend of my family, the Comte de Neuvillon, who, having emigrated, has returned to France without any fortune whatever, and who is my partner in this concern, less for my profit than his. Without telling him what my motives were, I explained to him that I was as poor as he, but that I had enough money to start a speculation in which he might be usefully employed. My tutor was the Abbé Grossier, whom Charles X, on my recommendation, appointed keeper of the books at the Arsenal, which were returned to that prince when he was still monsieur. The Abbé Grossier was deeply learned with regard to China, its manners and customs. He made me heir to this knowledge at an age when it is difficult not to become a fanatic for the things we learn. At 25 I knew Chinese, and I confess I have never been able to check myself in an exclusive admiration for that nation, who conquered their conquerors, whose annals extend back indisputably to a period more remote than mythological or Bible times, who by their immutable institutions have preserved the integrity of their empire, whose monuments are gigantic, whose administration is perfect, among whom revolutions are impossible, who have regarded ideal beauty as a barren element in art, who have carried luxury and industry to such a pitch that we cannot outdo them in anything, while they are our equals in things where we believe ourselves superior. Still, monsieur, though I often make a jest of comparing China with the present condition of European states, I am not a Chinaman, I am a French gentleman. If you entertain any doubts as to the financial side of this undertaking, I can prove to you that at this moment we have 2,500 subscribers to this work, which is literary, iconographical, statistical, and religious. Its importance has been generally appreciated. Our subscribers belong to every nation in Europe. We have but 1,200 in France. Our book will cost about 300 francs, and the Comte de Neuvillon will derive from it from 6,000 to 7,000 francs a year, for his comfort was the real motive of the undertaking. For my part, I aimed only at the possibility of affording my children some pleasures. The 100,000 francs I have made, quite in spite of myself, will pay for their fencing lessons, horses, dress, and theatres, pay the masters who teach them accomplishments, procure them canvases to spoil, the books they may wish to buy, in short, all the little fancies which a father finds so much pleasure in gratifying. If I had been compelled to refuse these indulgences to my poor boys, who are so good and work so hard, the sacrifice I made to the honour of my name would have been doubly painful. In point of fact, the 12 years I have spent in retirement from the world to educate my children have led to my being completely forgotten at court. I have given up the career of politics. I have lost my historical fortune and all the distinctions which I might have acquired and bequeathed to my children. But our house will have lost nothing. My boys will be men of mark. Though I have missed the senatorship, they will win it nobly by devoting themselves to the affairs of the country, and doing such service as is not soon forgotten. While purifying the past record of my family, I have ensured it a glorious future. And is not that to have achieved a noble task, though in secret and without glory? And now, monsieur, have you any other explanations to ask me?" At this instant the tramp of horses was heard in the courtyard. "Here they are," said the Marquis. In a moment the two lads, fashionably but plainly dressed, came into the room, booted, spurred, and gloved, and flourishing their riding whips. Their beaming faces brought in the freshness of the outer air. They were brilliant with health. They both grasped their father's hand, giving him a look, as friends do, a glance of unspoken affection, and then they bowed coldly to the lawyer. Popinot felt that it was quite unnecessary to question the Marquis as to his relations towards his sons. "Have you enjoyed yourselves?" asked the Marquis. "Yes, father, I knocked down 6 dolls in 12 shots at the first trial," cried Camille. "And where did you ride?" "In the Bois. We saw my mother." "Did she stop?" "We were riding so fast just then that I dare say she did not see us," replied the young Count. "But then why did you not go to speak to her?" "I fancy I have noticed, father, that she does not care that we should speak to her in public," said Clément in an undertone. "We are a little too big." The judge's hearing was keen enough to catch these words, which brought a cloud to the Marquis's brow. Popinot took pleasure in contemplating the picture of the father and his boys. His eyes went back with a sense of pathos to Monsieur d'Espard's face. His features, his expression, and his manner all expressed honesty in its noblest aspect, intellectual and chivalrous honesty, nobility in all its beauty. You see, monsieur," said the Marquis, and his hesitation had returned, "you see that justice may look in here at any time, yes, at any time, here. If there is anybody crazy, it can only be the children, the children, who are a little crazy about their father, and the father who is very crazy about his children, but that sort of madness rings true." At this juncture, Madame Jeanrenaud's voice was heard in the ante-room, and the good woman came bustling in spite of the manservant's remonstrances. "I take no roundabout ways, I can tell you," she exclaimed. "Yes, Monsieur le Marquis, I want to speak to you this very minute," she went on, with a comprehensive bow to the company. "By George, and I am too late as it is, since monsieur the criminal judge is before me." "Criminal?" cried the two boys. Good reason why I did not find you at your own house, since you are here. Well, well, the law is always to the fore when there is mischief brewing. I came, Monsieur le Marquis, to tell you that my son and I are of one mind to give you everything back, since our honor is threatened. My son and I, we had rather give you back everything than cause you the smallest trouble. My word, they must be as stupid as pans without handles, to call you a lunatic." "A lunatic? My father?" exclaimed the boys, clinging to the Marquis. "What is this?" "Silence, madame," said Popinot. "Children, leave us," said the Marquis. The two boys went into the garden without a word, but very much alarmed. "Madame," said the judge, "the moneys paid to you by Monsieur le Marquis were legally due, though given to you in virtue of a very far-reaching theory of honesty. If all the people possessed of confiscated goods, by whatever cause, even if acquired by treachery, were compelled to make restitution every 150 years, there would be few legitimate owners in France. The possessions of Jacques Coeur enriched 20 noble families. The confiscations pronounced by the English to the advantage of their adherents at the time when they held a part of France made the fortune of several princely houses. Our law allows Monsieur d'Espard to dispose of his income without accounting for it, or suffering him to be accused of its misapplication. A commission in lunacy can only be granted when a man's actions are devoid of reason. But in this case, the remittances made to you have a reason, based on the most sacred and most honorable motives. Hence you may keep it all without remorse, and leave the world to misinterpret a noble action. In Paris, the highest virtue is the object of the foulest calumny. It is unfortunately the present condition of society that makes the Marquis's actions sublime. For the honor of my country, I would that such deeds were regarded as a matter of course. But as things are, I am forced, by comparison, to look upon Monsieur d'Espard as a man to whom a crown should be awarded, rather than that he should be threatened with a commission in lunacy. In the course of a long professional career, I have seen and heard nothing that has touched me more deeply than that I have just seen and heard. But it is not extraordinary that virtue should wear its noblest aspect when it is practised by men of the highest class. Having heard me express myself in this way, I hope, Monsieur le Marquis, that you feel certain of my silence, and that you will not for a moment be uneasy as to the decision pronounced in the case, if it comes before the court." "There now, well said," cried Madame Jeanrenaud. "That is something like a judge. Look here, my dear sir, I would hug you if I were not so ugly. You speak like a book." The Marquis held out his hand to Popinot, who gently pressed it with a look full of sympathetic comprehension at this great man in private life, and the Marquis responded with a pleasant smile. These two natures, both so large and full, one commonplace but divinely kind, the other lofty and sublime, had fallen into unison gently, without a jar, without a flash of passion, as though two pure lights had been merged into one. The father of a whole district felt himself worthy to grasp the hand of this man who was doubly noble, and the Marquis felt in the depths of his soul an instinct that told him that the judge's hand was one of those from which the treasures of inexhaustible beneficence perennially flow. "Monsieur le Marquis," added Popinot, with a bow, "I am happy to be able to tell you that from the first words of this inquiry I regarded my clerk as quite unnecessary." He went close to Monsieur d'Espard, led him into the window bay, and said, "It is time that you should return home, monsieur. I believe that Madame la Marquise has acted in this matter under an influence which you ought at once to counteract." Popinot withdrew. He looked back several times as he crossed the courtyard, touched by the recollection of the scene. It was one of those which take root in the memory, to blossom again in certain hours when the soul seeks consolation. "Those rooms would just suit me," said he to himself as he reached home. "If Monsieur d'Espard leaves them, I will take up his lease." The next day, at about 10 in the morning, Popinot, who had written out his report the previous evening, made his way to the Palais de Justice, intending to have prompt and righteous justice done. As he went to the robing room to put on his gown and bands, the usher told him that the president of his court begged him to attend in his private room, where he was waiting for him. Popinot forthwith obeyed. "Good morning, my dear Popinot," said the president. "I have been waiting for you." "Why, Monsieur le Président, is anything wrong?" "A mere silly trifle," said the president. "The keeper of the seals, with whom I had the honor of dining yesterday, led me apart into a corner. He had heard that you had been to tea with Madame d'Espard, in whose case you were employed to make inquiries. He gave me to understand that it would be as well that you should not sit on this case." "But, Monsieur le Président, I can prove that I left Madame d'Espard's house at the moment when tea was brought in, and my conscience—" "Yes, yes, the whole bench, the two courts, all the profession know you. I need not repeat what I said about you to his Eminence. But, you know, Caesar's wife must not be suspected. So we shall not make this foolish trifle a matter of discipline, but only of proprieties. Between ourselves, it is not on your account, but on that of the bench." "But, monsieur, if you only knew the kind of woman," said the judge, trying to pull his report out of his pocket. "I am perfectly certain that you have proceeded in this matter with the strictest independence of judgment. I myself, in the provinces, have often taken more than a cup of tea with the people I had to try. But the fact that the keeper of the seals should have mentioned it, and that you might be talked about, is enough to make the court avoid any discussion of the matter. Any conflict with public opinion must always be dangerous for a constitutional body, even when the right is on its side against the public, because their weapons are not equal. Journalism may say or suppose anything, and our dignity forbids us even to reply. In fact, I have spoken of the matter to your president, and Monsieur Camusot has been appointed in your place on your retirement, which you will signify. It is a family matter, so to speak. And now I beg you to signify your retirement from the case as a personal favor. To make up, you will get the cross of the Legion of Honor, which has so long been due to you. I make that my business." When he saw Monsieur Camusot, a judge recently called to Paris from a provincial court of the same class, as he went forward bowing to the judge and the president, Popinot could not repress an ironical smile. This pale, fair young man, full of covert ambition, looked ready to hang and unhang at the pleasure of any earthly king, the innocent and the guilty alike, and to follow the example of a Laubardemont rather than that of a Mole. Popinot withdrew with a bow. He scorned to deny the lying accusation that had been brought against him. End of section 5. End of the Commission in Lunacy by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Clara Bell.